Okay, welcome to Compliance Thursdays. My name is Steve Dodds. This week we'll be talking about non-public personal information compliance. So last week we hit on the first piece that we need to worry about, which is customer notification, privacy policy. How do we tell the customer what we're going to be doing with their information and make sure we have their permission if we need it? This week we're going to talk about what we do with that information and how we actually keep it private, and what compliance is required there as far as reporting and procedures, all that kind of stuff. So if you've been on one of these webinars before, you know that our online training at Garage Composites is all housed on Wheelhouse College. So this is the platform that we use. This is where Sam's Garage is housed, Sam's Dock, Sam's Peloton for the bicycle industry, and then also Power Sports Dealership Compliance. So if you're interested in getting certified as a compliance manager and getting all of the information that you need to make sure your dealership is compliant, this is a great way to do it. You can come in here and subscribe. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at steve@Garage Composites or compliance@garagecomposites.com. Either one would work. So I'm going to go ahead and go into our portal here. And last week we watched the financial privacy rules and privacy policy form, so that we knew how to fill out the form and when to give it out. This week we're going to watch the safeguard rules video. So let's go ahead and get going on that. So the second part is the safeguards rule. And basically what that says is that now that you've told the customer what you're going to do with this information, then if you told them you're going to keep it private or you're not going to share it, then you need to make sure it stays private. So there are a couple different components to that. Number one, you need to designate a coordinator of the program. So typically that would be your compliance manager, or it would be you in most cases, whoever's getting trained up on this video series and getting certified. It would be your responsibility to be the coordinator. You're supposed to identify foreseeable threats. So make sure that, common sense things are taken into account. You have a locked office that the information is in. It's not in a public area. It's, not in the salesman's desks. It's kept in a secure area. You're supposed to develop and implement a system to keep the information safe. Oversee any service providers that you give the information to. So an example I gave earlier, if you give a document shredding company your documents, you are supposed to make sure that they actually shred your documents, which is why most document shredding companies actually do it on site, so that they can make sure that not only are they doing it, but they're doing it. The last thing that you're required to do is review your program and keep it up to date. There's not a standard period of time that's stated. Basically what the requirement says is you should update it as often as reasonably necessary. So most dealerships, once a year, it's a great thing to do right after or right before the first of the year, when most of us are pretty slow in the power sports industry. Set a time once a year, review your policy, and make sure that you're still taking everything into account that you need to take into account. It always comes back to what is the penalty if I don't do this, or if information gets out. So the enforcement piece, it's $11,000 per violation. Now, that violation can be applied any number of different ways when it comes to, the safeguards rules or the privacy policy requirement. What I can tell you is that if you go out and look in your salesman's desk and you find a stack of non-public information, it's a lot of money. Or if the information were to get out, even a single file can have maybe 10 different pieces of non-public information. So I would definitely take some time, make sure that you guys are treating the non-public information in the appropriate manner. So there's been a lot of talk lately about the Customer Financial Protection Bureau and the future of that organization. I wanted to address it in this chapter because they're not the only ones that deal with the dealers and look at regulations and hold dealers accountable for following those regulations. The FTC actually has been in charge of that for many years. So whether you're talking about privacy rules or you're talking about some other regulation, I mention who it is, like the CFPB or the FTC, that you need to be worried about, but really it's less about that and it's more about what the rule is and how to follow it. Okay, so let's talk for a second about the compliance. So basically what the compliance manager would be somebody that's responsible for these programs. If you have an audit, and this is where it becomes really important that you have a compliance manager. If you have an audit, first thing they're going to want to know is who is responsible for your compliance at the dealership. And then that person is going to need to have the processes in place to make sure that things like this, like the non-public personal information, is handled correctly. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to show you the bulk of the how you want to set the program up. So we have a full workbook that gives you all of the it kind of walks you through how to set up your program, and that's available through the compliance training. You don't necessarily need the workbook, but it is a really big help. What I'll do today is just walk you guys through what the steps are that you need to take to kind of get to the point where you have this process in place. So the first thing you'll want to do is a risk assessment, and the risk assessment is really just tracking all of the non-public personal information that you collect, where it goes, where it's stored, what you do with it, setting those policies in place so that if you get an audit, you can simply lay out, okay, this is where we collect the information, this is what we do with it, this is where it's stored. So the risk assessment is really the first step in setting that and tracking those processes. So what you'll want to do is come up with a list of different types of deals and the places that you collect this information. So for example, and the simplest one is if you do a test ride with a customer. If you do a test ride, of course, you would collect a copy of the driver's license, get them to sign a liability waiver, and then also at that point, you would give them a copy of your privacy policy. At the same time, I would recommend getting this privacy policy signed and keeping a copy for yourself. That's your record that you gave the customer a copy of the privacy policy. At that point, what you want to do is document what happens with that non-public personal information. So usually at that point, the customer goes on a test ride. It's kept at the sales manager's desk, we'll say. After the test ride, if it does not turn into a deal, then that information needs to be kept for 25 months. So that would go into some sort of storage, locked storage, either in the finance manager's office or in the HR office, in the accounting office, wherever that's stored. And that would be locked and tracked, and then after 25 months you can get rid of it. So that would be what you would do with, say, test rides. If you had a deal where the customer financed and they bought, then you would track, we collect the driver's license copy when we collect the application for credit, and at that point we get a privacy policy signed. That information then goes to the sales manager's desk. When we're ready to submit for credit, maybe it goes to the finance manager's office. After it's approved and the customer signs their paperwork, all the paperwork is bundled up, and that goes to the DMV clerk for processing. It goes to whoever goes for funding to be processed, and then after all that's processed, it goes to, we'll say, the accounting office, to these filing cabinets where it's locked and stored for the 7 or 10 years, whatever's required in your state. Those things, that's what you want to track. That's your initial risk assessment. So it's figuring out, okay, where does information go? Do we need to tighten up those processes? That's another part of the risk assessment. Making sure if you're storing information digitally, that's protected too. Making sure things like computers time out. Making sure that we're not leaving information somewhere where it could be getting out, and kind of documenting that and figuring out where those things go. So the second piece is identifying and securing the secure document areas. So secure document area example would be like your sales manager's office. Where is the information stored? That's designated as a secure document area. The finance manager's office would definitely be a secure document area. Your your dead deal storage, your long-term storage, those are all secure document areas. You want to identify those and make sure that you have controls on who has access to that stuff. The third step is really the staff training. So once we've identified the risk and set the areas where this information is going to be stored, we have processes we're going to develop and put into place. Then we need to train our staff on those processes. So, things like making sure the salesmen, when they collect this information, they know where to take it, where it's stored. They know if they have access to it, when they have access to it, when they don't have access to it, who they need to contact to get access to the information if they need it. Those kind of processes and training needs to happen at that point. So then you have the full staff secure document area storage. So where the NPI staff training is really what we do when we collect it, where we drop it, the full staff training would include not just your sales department, which is where most of this stuff is collected, but also other managers for other departments. If they need access to this information, here's where it's stored, here's how you can get it, here's who's responsible for it. Step 5 would be making sure you have something in the employee handbook so that when you bring staff on board, they sign off that they understand the process, that they know what they're supposed to do with the information. This would also be signed off on with the existing employees, and when you update your employee textbook or employee handbook, this would be something they would be responsible for re-signing, rereading, etc. And then the big thing is, once we have all this stuff in place, step 6 is monitoring and enforcing. So this is where, again, having a compliance manager is really important, because that's the person that's responsible for monitoring and making sure that processes are followed. That is probably, 10 minutes a week that you need to go in, walk around the dealership, make sure that people are doing what they should be doing with stuff. It's not a time-consuming thing, but it is really important that we catch and identify potential problems before they become a problem. So if we see that salespeople have started leaving test ride waivers with non-public personal information in their desks instead of turning it in to the sales manager, that needs to be addressed immediately. It's just a matter of staying on top of it at that point and making sure that we're following the processes. So I'm gonna send you guys a link to download the instruction piece. If you have any other questions, you can contact me at compliance@Garage Composites or steve@garagecomposites.com. But this will give you some basic instructions on how to walk through, how to create your own program. Another thing I would recommend is getting your hands on the Carlaw F&I Legal Desk Book. This is the law firm that we use for our compliance program. So it's Hudson Cook put together this legal desk book. It is a great reference guide. It's not necessarily something you would read from cover to cover. It's more of a question and answer reference guide, but it is really valuable when it comes to, specific questions about specific regulations. So I would get my hands on that. You can order that. I think it's about $50. It's also what we use as our textbook for our program. If you have any questions about anything we just went over, again, please email me at compliance@GarageComposites. I'm happy to answer any specific questions. Next week, we will be talking about the Military Lending Act. There have been some changes recently regarding the Military Lending Act. The DoD made some statements that they had to defend, and then the court sided with them on those. One of the big statements is they said that gap protection is credit insurance, and you cannot sell credit insurance to anybody that's covered by the Military Lending Act. So if you're not familiar with that, if you're not already checking the Military Lending Act record check before every single finance sale, you need to tune in. You need to get more information on it. July 11th, we'll be putting that out. As you can see, there will not be a compliance webinar on the 4th. Hopefully everybody will be off, having fun, enjoying the holiday, and hopefully I will see you on the 11th. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.